5.
It is not normal for a country to have millions of foreign people claiming benefits.
4.
I think of reform as basically being about restoration, not revolution.
3.
The UK is killing its own economy by not exploiting the North Sea.
2.
Even sort of state bodies like the Office for Budget Responsibility have changed their tune on immigration, because guess what? When the facts change, you should change your mind.
1. We have liftoff.
Welcome once again to Planet Normal, the Telegraph podcast with Allison Pearson.
Hello.
And me, Liam Halligan. Your countries are going to hell because of mass immigration. So said President Trump, talking to the UK and Europe in particular, as he addressed the United Nations earlier this week. Trump may still be angry that he once offered to redevelop the UN building, a prominent fixture on the New York skyline, but the superannuated boffins went with another developer. But this time he didn't hold back. And with the US still yanking chains on tariffs, the international diplomatic crowd having sniggered and mocked Trump when he addressed the UN during his first term as president, were this time forced to sit stone-faced and listen. Almost on cue, Nigel Farage's Reform Party vowed to revisit indefinite leave to remain. That would be a significant tightening of the UK's immigration rules. Pass the smelling salts, Allison. It's a topic you tackled in your latest Telegraph column, link in the show notes to this episode. Having ticked off the limeys about immigration, Trump then declared that, quote, Britain only recognised Palestine because it's flooded with foreigners. Another statement that unnerved Britain's bien-pensants. What do they make of this in Israel? Handily enough, the co-pilots just returned. Ed Davey, possibly the only male party leader not on Manjaro, opened the Lib Dem conference by banging a drum. Are we at peak yellow, or could the Lib Dems yet build on their 72 House of Commons seats? And ahead of Labour's conference in Liverpool, is Starmer about to accuse a third of the country of being far right? And will Downing Street's all clear to another runway at Gatwick spark growth and boost the economy? We need some good news, Allison. Inflation's 3.8% and rising, and the budget black hole is getting even bigger.
You know, Trump was actually very funny because, you know, he has these absolutely sort of mad tangents he goes off on. And he was really cross that the UN hadn't allowed him to redevelop their building. And he kept saying, they could have had marble. They had terrazzo. In the middle of this grand address to all the world's panjandrums, he was kind of still bellyaching.
I'm good at this stuff. It reminded me for that moment of Margaret Thatcher after she was on her way out, standing at the dispatch box. I'm enjoying this.
Yeah. He also had a go at them because when he and Melania arrived, the escalator stopped halfway and then the teleprompter didn't work. So he clearly thought he was being sabotaged.
Stitched up.
Of course, he was supposed to speak for 15 minutes. I think he spoke for 53.
Well, it's like one of your interviews.
Yes, thank you. We leave you to do the short, snappy, newsy ones. I do the deep dives, Halligan. I do the deep dives. But it was a strange mixture, wasn't it? I mean, it was pretty classic Trump because you had all the absolutely shameless boasting. Apparently he's ended 7 wars in 8 months, which I thought was, could anybody name any of them? And he kept saying, everyone thinks I should get the Nobel Peace Prize. He thought, not sure it's everyone, is it? But as you say, Liam, he did drop some truth bombs. I mean, he pointed out that European countries are still buying oil and gas from Russia when they're supposed to be at war with Russia. And he said, have you ever heard of anything as crazy as that? And he did, as you alluded to in your intro, he did speak very passionately about Europe being threatened by 2 things: uncontrolled immigration and by green policies. And I thought it made pretty awkward listening, particularly for Keir Starmer. Trump's obviously very, very annoyed that the UK is throwing out windmills. My God, he hates windmills, doesn't he? And that the UK is killing its own economy by not exploiting the North Sea. And you can't help thinking, Liam, given our own economic predicament, we'll come on to that. But if you think that he was saying food prices down, energy prices down, stock market up, it's food prices here, I think, are absolutely just beyond, aren't they?
They are. They're officially 5.1% in food price inflation. But do you know anyone that thinks their shopping basket, when they go to the supermarket, is only 5.1% more expensive than it was this time last year. So many people I know, they're putting the treats back. They're not buying the tub of ice cream. They're going with the own brand stuff. And they're still going into a supermarket to pick up a few bits on a Tuesday night, and they're dropping 100 quid. This inflation thing is big. The OECD, of course, the Paris-based think tank, basically confirmed what some of us have been saying for a long time, that the UK is now a proper inflation outlier. Since the spring, inflation across the Eurozone, across the Western world, has either pretty much steadied or gone down. It's certainly well below 3% in the Eurozone. It's still below 3% in the States, even though Trump's tariffs have obviously aggravated inflation because they make goods more expensive in America. Because when you buy goods, you've also got to pay the tariff effectively, but still they're way below where the UK currently is. And it is a major problem, this inflation now.
The supermarkets, I think they're just passing on the Rachel's employers' national insurance costs. We'll talk about Rachel and her forthcoming budget of fun coming up soon. Hide everything under the bed. It's going to be my advice. We'll get some sager economic advice from The Economist later on. But given how much money we do need to save, Liam, in the UK, where things, as you keep outlining, are pretty dire, it was very interesting this week, wasn't it? This Reform's really bold pledge to scrap indefinite leave to remain while deporting hundreds of thousands of migrants who come here and are on benefits within 5 years and are going to end up costing Britain an absolutely crazy amount of money over their lifetimes. And Reform Zeus have called Britain a soft touch and a food bank for the rest of the world. I don't know what you thought, Liam. I thought that obviously we had the sort of hysterical pass the smelling salts liberal media reaction. But it struck me that we only need this radical immigration plan because governments have not done what they were supposed to do, what the electorate was promised. It is not normal for a country to have millions of foreign people claiming benefits. We've got 1 in 6 people claiming universal credit are immigrants. No other country I can think of extends such largesse to migrant workers. Most people will know if they've worked abroad, you go to a foreign country, you get a work visa, you pay your taxes, the visa runs out. If you've behaved yourself, if they think you're a good enough person to have around, a productive person, they renew your visa. And if you don't, you are out. So we are a complete outlier. And yet in the coverage, which, you know, Reform are all about trying to deal with the impact of the so-called Boris wave. We've spoken about it before, haven't we, on Planet Normal? 3.8 million people granted UK visas between 2021 and 2024. And from next year, when about 800,000 of them will become eligible for this indefinite leave to remain. So Reform are absolutely sane and right to be saying they want to do something about it, are they not?
I think it's certainly now front and centre as the Overton window of British politics shifts. Even sort of state bodies like the Office for Budget Responsibility have changed their tune on immigration. Because guess what? When the facts change, you should change your mind. And the facts have changed. In the run-up to 1997, British inflation or inflation into the UK would average about 50,000 a year. And that was a pace where those people could be absorbed, where race relations remained for the most part not too bad, having improved a lot since the 60s and the 70s, as we've often discussed. But the figures you just gave earlier, you know, they imply an annual immigration number of 750,000 plus. In 1 year, over 1 million. That's a net number. So lots of people leaving to go and live in Spain and so on. 200,000-300,000 a year or so on people leave the UK for various reasons. So the actual gross immigration numbers well over 1 million. And that's what we've seen. And once you've been here for 5 years, you can apply for indefinite leave to remain. And with that comes lots and lots of additional entitlements and benefits and thus costs to the exchequer. And a lot of these people, as you say, they're dependents and they won't work, Allison. So the fiscal implications of this, as the OBR have pointed out a lot over the last year, in particular, one of their experts, Professor David Miles, who is no reactionary at all. He's a very straight-laced, sort of politically non-tribal, very technical economist. The fiscal cost of this now is potentially ruinous. And so people just have to put their sensibilities to one side, or at least weigh them up against the damage that will be done to the country if international capital markets refuse to lend money to the UK, or will only lend money at a really, really high rate of interest. We are an inflation outlier, Allison, as the OECD confirmed this week, but we're even more of an interest rate outlier when it comes to the interest rates that financial markets charge the British government to borrow. Now, way ahead, way above where they are across Western Europe, higher than America, higher than the likes of Greece and Spain, countries that have had fiscal crises in pretty recent memory. So this now is becoming a major, major problem. It's not enough to just say, oh, I think this is a bit ghastly, we can't deal with it. We have to grab this issue, not only because of the fiscal cost, but also because it is very much tearing at the social fabric. And that is the real crunch issue. Ordinary folk who are often competing at the sharp end of the labour market, at the sharp end of the demand for very scarce public services, whether it's school places, healthcare, social care, whatever it is, they are now really feeling the strain. And Britain's great success in the post-war period of absorbing waves of immigration, and for the most part doing so successfully, that now is completely being jeopardized. And on that point, Trump is dead right.
Yeah, absolutely he is. And it was interesting to see the reaction at the Reform press conference where Farage and Youssef were making clearly the outlandish suggestion that British people should come first. I mean, whoever could have thought of anything like that? And one of the reporters said, oh, won't all this, shipping off migrants who aren't paying their way, isn't that against the British idea of fair play? I thought that was, yeah, I know. And I thought it's so interesting, isn't it?
There's someone with a trust fund.
Or just a sort of, years and years of reading The Guardian and your brain turning to chia seeds, isn't it? I mean, absolutely astonishing that fair play, which belongs apparently to everyone else except the British. We get sent lots of very interesting stories, but one Telegraph reader, this is just a tiny example, Liam, of what's going on. I mean, somebody told me this week that huge number of medical places now are taken by foreign applicants because they pay the higher fees. So a bright, aspirational, kid from our kind of background, well, if you're white male boy, with good A levels, you can forget getting into a British medical school. But a Telegraph reader just pointed out that student nurses who are qualifying this year are only being offered 50% contracts because the Conservative government brought in, obviously, in that Boris wave, too many foreign workers and flooded the NHS with foreign nurses before the 2024 nurses graduated. And one of the nurses, somebody said to her, one of the girls who was about to qualify, they said to her, oh, which hospital are you going to be working in? McDonald's, she replied, right? This is a young British woman, one amongst thousands, who would have been paying $9,000 a year in fees.
Because, of course, nurses have to have degrees these days for some reason.
Have to have degrees.
So they have to get in loads of debt.
So she's now going to be doing
Madness.
50% work share of a nursing job with the 2025 graduates. So these actually have really serious knock-on effects. And we are not a charity for all the people from the rest of the world. And the other thing, I think, which is, again, a point Trump made, is about national character. Now, anyone who's been into a hospital has often had good care from people from overseas. But the last couple of times I've been in hospital, a lot of the staff have extremely poor English. And particularly, I think if you're elderly and you're uncomfortable and you want to be, looked after, being tended to by people who can't speak your language. And this is, one of the points made by Reform in their plan is that people who come must be able to speak English really rather well. And they must come and do a job where they will be a tax contributor. And coming back to what I was saying originally, this shouldn't be controversial, should it? This is what applies in every other country. And how we got into a situation where we think this is unfair or revolutionary. It's not revolutionary. It's a restoration to where we should have been if we'd been governed properly.
It's going to be very, very interesting to see how the other parties respond to this, because of a lot of what you've just said, Alison, of course it will chime with Conservatives on the right of the party, if you like, people that are thinking, backing reform. What is Kemi going to say about this? She's been talking about tied to immigration rules as well. She's been talking about questioning indefinite leave to remain.
Haven't they said that they were going to double the waiting? To be fair to the Conservatives, they have said they wanted to double the period of waiting to 10 years, haven't they?
I was going to say, they have said that they want to double the waiting period, but they've only said it once or twice. The senior Tories will deny that. It hasn't really cut through. And that just shows how difficult it is to be in opposition. But what are Labour going to say? Because a lot of what Farage is saying and Youssef is saying here will go down well among traditional Labour red wall voters. Farage is talking about scrapping the 2-child cap for child benefit, right? Which obviously means you can have 3 or 4 kids and get child benefit for all of them. A lot of people don't like that in traditional Labour seats because they'll be working and they'll see people on the estate who aren't working and having loads of kids that are all being paid for. They get a bigger house from the state and so on. But then Farage did a twist and he said, yeah, but we're only going to scrap the 2-child benefit cap for British citizens. So he made it a kind of nativist welfare play. And that's what he's doing here too. And a lot of traditional Labour voters are going to like the sound of this. But if Starmer goes anywhere near this, the left of his party, the kind of Islington set, the Emily Thornberrys, and even the Yvette Coopers are going to go absolutely ballistic because this really rattles their cage. This really undermines all their kind of sensitivities, the reason they went into the Labour Party in the first place. And this is an issue, a lot like net zero, Alison, which of course Farage has also exploited in this way, which just tears the Labour Party apart. On the one hand, you have, again, the kind of Islington tendency, the more well-heeled Labour voters in the university towns and the posher parts of London and other big cities and so on. And of course, they love net zero because it allows them to virtue signal. It allows them to spend their money on a flashy electric car and then sniff and jeer and point fingers at everybody that hasn't done that. They can buy a 50 grand heat pump because that's nothing to them. They've just got it lying around in an account, a lot of these people. Meanwhile, the trade unions hate net zero. The GMB, the third biggest trade union, their leader speaks out against net zero all the time because it's destroying jobs in manufacturing. It's destroying jobs in Britain's oil and gas complex. It's destroying Britain's car industry, which employs over 1 million people. And it's similar with this toughening of the rules on immigration. Labour know they need to tackle immigration, but the further Farage tacks away from what was the consensus in previous years, the more he will stretch Labour. Labour will not be able to go there. And I do think for all the conniptions, if you like, of, to use the word that you used in your column, for all the kind of angst about this among the soft left and among Labour, and for all the brickbats that have been thrown at Farage and Youssef for this, I do think this is going to make them go up in opinion polls. I do.
Those people you described, the Emily Thornberry set, there just simply aren't enough of them, are there, Liam? I mean, the university towns and BBC employees, adding them together, they're not going to make a general election victory. And it will be very interesting. Starmer's giving a speech tomorrow, Friday, in which he'll be trying to display his progressive credentials. But as you say, it's extremely difficult to reconcile the bad smell attitude to Nigel Farage, who just is, I believe, articulating what the vast majority of people think, that we're being mugs, basically. I think it's interesting, Liam, just to say, actually, our friend Professor Matt Goodwin said something very interesting this week. He said, opposition to mass immigration is the new Brexit. And I think that we could see that the fault lines coming through, that the red wall, certainly my part of the world, Wales, Scotland, may well come into that. We were both struck, weren't we, by Zia Youssef using a phrase when someone at the press conference said, oh, what about all the legal objections? And Zia said that the country had fallen into a kind of willed helplessness. And I do think that. And I think what I respond to in the reform plan, although I have to say, I think it needs more caveats. They can't just be targeting immigrants who have been here for many years, married, have partners, children, grandchildren. I know it's caused a lot of alarm amongst some of those people. And I think that they need to move pretty swiftly to say, you know, if you've raised your family here and if you've worked hard and become a good person, a good British citizen, you have nothing to fear. We certainly don't want indiscriminate targeting of people who have earned their British citizenship, but we certainly should set the bar much, much higher for British citizenship. But yes, I thought that phrase, willed helplessness, and I think it seems to cover so much, not just immigration. The fact that we've got Rachel Reeves now coming up to the budget of fun, you know, the November, how big's the black hole now? 53 billion and rising. But the point is that, oh no, we can't possibly cut anything. We can't possibly cut this absolutely crazy amount of public spending, even though we know it's rubbish. You know, loads of it needs to be just hacked away. But no, we can't do that. So that's more willed helplessness, isn't it? That's too hard. So we're going to bung up taxes again with the opposite of the virtuous spiral that you keep outlining to us. I mean, surely if she does in this budget what they're indicating she'll do, you know, the clown car hurtling towards the edge of the cliff is going to get ever faster, isn't it?
I think willed helplessness is a good phrase, the kind of defeatist attitude that's pervaded the British state now for quite a few years. You can't get away with this in the private sector. If you just have this kind of, well, it's all too difficult, we're not going to even think about it, we're just going to file it away. You can do that in the public sector until somebody comes along and stops your paycheck. And so I do think we need a lot more realism, and it will, in the end, not just be voters, but financial markets, as I've said many, many times, that will impose that realism, because they are looking at the numbers, and the numbers look really, really bad. Unfortunately, what Labour desperately needs is some economic growth. The OECD not only said that the UK would have easily the highest inflation on average during 2025 of any other major economy, it also said that growth next year will slow down significantly. That's absolutely not what Labour wants to hear. If you get growth, you get more tax revenue at given tax rates. You get less benefit spending because more people are in work and you need to support the economy less. But the danger now is, Allison, and Rachel Reeves has delayed the budget all the way to November the 26th. You know, it's hardly an autumn budget when it's almost in Advent, which is when it is, because she's looking for a miracle. She's hoping something turns up, or she's hoping there's a sort of major geopolitical squall that she can then blame for the fact that none of her numbers make any sense. But the danger now is that she pulls the bigger tax lever in November, looking for more taxation, and the taxation doesn't come. So we'll end up with higher tax rates and less tax revenue, because she will literally have pushed the economy off a cliff, pushing it into recession. The tax burden was already at a 70-year high, tax to share of GDP, when she became Chancellor. That's what the Tories bequeathed Labour. It was not a nice inheritance, and you should always point that out when assessing Rachel Reeves, in fairness. But they've certainly made it a lot worse by willfully pushing up taxation, ideologically pushing up taxation, massive bungs to public sector. This employment rights bill is sending business leaders around the bend. And I'm not just talking about big corporate bosses. I'm talking about people running small businesses. They're not taking people on because they're worried about the conditions that come with employment now, not just the higher national insurance costs. Obviously, the employer rate of national insurance went up, but the threshold where you start paying national insurance was yanked down from about 12 grand to 5 grand. That's why so many of the little part-time jobs you get in retail, hospitality, that's why it's so difficult to find those jobs now. That's why, you know, students are having problems getting seasonal jobs in those kind of industries, because Reeves has made it too expensive, because she has absolutely no experience of working in the real world, apart from a little bit of time at a bank when she was already singled out for some kind of political elevation. And this is the problem. We don't have anyone talking to the people making the decisions who has proper nous, not even about financial markets. They certainly don't have that, but just about, you know, making payroll, running a business. And that is a problem. That is really showing now in the policies that Labour are coming up with. And my concern, and the concern of a lot of people in financial markets, is that the way the politics of this is going, is there going to be a new deputy leader? Is there going to be a leadership challenge? Starmer and Reeves, they are relatively the grown-ups at the top of the Labour Party. They literally are.
It's interesting, though, also another big story of the week was the UK recognising Palestine as a state, Liam. And that was another example, wasn't it, of the left, of Starmer, pure internal party politics, really. And I think that we have this absolutely astonishing situation, I think, in which one ethnic minority group in the UK is now largely dictating British foreign policy. You mentioned at the top that I just not long got back from Israel. I went there to interview a hostage, an amazing guy called Eli Sharabi, who was abducted from Kibbutz Be'eri on southern Israel on the 7th of October 2023. He was held captive in conditions of absolute unspeakable degradation and torture. Funnily enough, the book he's written, Liam, which I think you'd love, is about how you survive that. How do you hang on with discipline, hanging on to your values? How do you remain a person in conditions that you wouldn't keep an animal in? But my concern, because Ellie was saying that a young man he mentored in the tunnels, Alon Oel, who's just recently turned 24, pianist, kidnapped from the Nova Music Festival. Alon is still there, over 700 days. Hamas did 6 days ago release proof of life. I mean, he has gone from looking like the most sweetest, fluffiest boy, like a young chick, really, to just the most gaunt, haunted, skeletal person. And to that group, that terror group, that bunch of barbarians, our Prime Minister has given a win, hasn't he? So one of the Hamas leaders said after Starmer had said that we were recognising Palestine, it was a victory, and this was the fruit of October the 7th. So well done us for massacring, butchering, raping 1,200 Jewish men, women and children. Sorry, I'm pretty disgusted, Liam. This week's Planet Normal Stowaway is Danny Kruger, a charity campaigner and the MP for East Wiltshire. Last week, Danny became the first sitting Conservative MP to defect to Reform UK since the general election. Danny was one of the Tory party's intellectual heavyweights, a speechwriter to David Cameron, political secretary to Boris Johnson when he was in number 10, and he also ran Robert Jenrick's campaign for the party leadership. Danny has been a powerful moral voice in the House of Commons. He spoke out about the state's abuse of power during the COVID lockdowns. He passionately opposes the assisted dying bill. And not long ago, he gave a formidable speech on the importance of Christianity in our national life to an almost empty chamber. Now, in his new party, Danny is in charge of preparing reform for government. So I began by asking Danny Kruger, didn't he feel a bit guilty jumping ship at a time when his defection would do serious damage to a struggling Tory party?
Yes, I did, Alison. On a personal level, that's exactly what I felt. And I really respect the principle of political loyalty that holds politicians together in a party. If we didn't have that, we'd have chaos. We wouldn't be able to have form governments. So parties matter, but ultimately the country comes first. And my view is that those of us who are actually conservative, who believe in the principles of conservatism, limited government, freedom, family, community, national sovereignty, these principles are no longer best served by the Conservative Party. In fact, unfortunately, the Conservative Party is a roadblock to those principles because in our first past the post system, you can only have one challenger from either side. And, reform are the best possible chance we've got to deliver that agenda now. And I'm afraid the Conservatives are in the way. It's very tough on a personal level, but that's how it is.
You did lead Robert Jenrick's leadership campaign. Of course, that leadership was eventually won by Kemi Badenoch. If Robert had become Tory leader with more forthright right-wing policies, might you have stayed?
Well, I hoped that Rob would win last year, not because I think on a personal level, I've got anything against Kemi. I just didn't think that her strategy was the right one. And I thought Rob's was right, which was to come out immediately after the general election as soon as possible and acknowledge the extent of our failure in government and make a series of commitments, which might well have caused significant splits in the Conservative Party, but would have demonstrated we knew where the voters are. And Kemi didn't do that. She prioritised unity over clarity. And as a result, the Conservatives may have been united, well, at least until I left, but they're not saying anything and the public aren't noticing. So I think strategically, she did make a mistake. Rob wasn't going to make that mistake. I still think he would have struggled with the essential facts that the Conservative brand is really damaged and, as I say, it's very split. But I did at least dream this time last year we might be able to pull ourselves out, but I don't think we can now.
Yes, a lot of us who did rate Kemi highly, I still rate her highly, have been disappointed by the inadequacy of the response to the scale of the defeat. Danny, you've said that the Tories are guilty of pursuing sham unity that comes from not doing anything bold or difficult or controversial. How much is that down to the fact that too many Tory MPs are Conservative in name only and don't want to support the leader in doing conservative things like, say, leaving the ECHR?
Yeah, I guess that is the essential problem. And even if you have brilliant leaders, and I do respect Kemi a lot, actually, I think she's courageous. She's shown a lot of resilience over the last year, and she's stuck to her strategy, which is in a sense admirable, even if it's the wrong one. It shows a certain degree of character. And yes, the problem is that she can't move, or she's not prepared to move if it risks splitting the party. And up till now, I think we probably are going to hear the Conservatives coming out with a commitment to leave the ECHR at some point soon. But, they've taken more than a year to get to this obvious place. And I think that's indicative of a party that can't even organise itself effectively in opposition. I don't know what it would try and do in government, given the splits. So, here we are. The alternative is reform. And yes, they're new. There's not very many of us in Parliament, certainly. There's a lot of people in the country now supporting us. But we're untested in government. And there's a lot that we need to put in place before we can legitimately challenge for power at the next election. But what we do have is leadership and unity behind not just, let's all play nicely, but actually a commitment to an agenda, which you heard our commitment to abolish the indefinite leave to remain, the terrible migration route that Boris Johnson opened up so disastrously. There is a series of very bold commitments now that reform stand for that I think will deliver for the country. And I'm afraid the Conservatives aren't doing that anymore. I
wonder if you think Kemi Badenoch will lead the Tories into the next election. And if she did, and Tories did promise to leave the ECHR or uncouple from the Human Rights Act, would you trust them to do it, Danny?
I'm not going to speculate on their internal politics and legal questions. I don't have to have a view on that anymore. What Kemi has done is to slowly build a bit of a consensus. The fact is, I think most of the other MPs now recognise the situation is so dire and the case for leaving the ECHR is so compelling that many of them will hold their nose and suck it up, which is not the kind of full-throat support that I think the country would expect. But anyway, so I think they are sincere in getting to that place, and I would trust them to do it in office. Defenders of the ECHR like to imagine there are huge, difficult, constitutional, legal, moral barriers to departure. They really aren't. Obviously, it's a tricky business to execute, but it can very plainly be done. In fact, some very good work has been done on that by Suella Braverman, among others, and reform politicians too. So I think it can be done. I would trust the Conservatives to do it if they promise to, but I'm afraid that isn't going to be enough to win over the public trust. A lot more is needed than that.
Reform did make a hugely important announcement this week. A Reform government would abolish indefinite leave to remain. Millions of unskilled non-EU workers were imported during the so-called Boris wave, and they would cost the taxpayer at least £234 billion. Danny, do you support this radical policy? And as someone who was in number 10 while 3.8 million people were allowed into the country over a very small number of years, despite the fact that Boris Johnson had promised us a very selective Australian points-based immigration system, what the hell went wrong?
Well, just to be clear, I was in number 10 just for those few crazy months before the 2019 election when Boris was trying to get Brexit through a minority House of Commons, and I was very proud of him for his achievements there. And unfortunately, the policy that was introduced was far too lax, as we've seen. And I think it's indicative, yes, of a failure of ministers, and ultimately the ministers responsible for that should take responsibility for it publicly. But I think it's indicative of a deeper problem with the British state, which is that ultimately ministers aren't really in charge. They are puppets of a system, and the system here, in the case of the Home Office, was ideologically opposed to migration restrictions, believed that, as the Treasury did and does, that large-scale, low-wage migration is actually good for the economy, that sort of increases economic activity, which is how they count national wealth, which is a crazy measure. And so the Home Office introduced a system which was directly the opposite of what the British public thought they were voting for when they voted Conservative in 2019 and when they voted for Brexit. So open borders is the terrible legacy of a lot of Labour and Conservative governments over the last 25 years. First, we had the European wave under Blair, and then the rest of the world wave under Boris. And in both cases, the public rightly outraged and are now looking to an alternative party that is genuinely committed to change. And that's what we announced, to undo the disaster of the so-called Boris wave by signalling very clearly and very early on that we are going to scrap that status, indefinite leave to remain. If you're here with that status now, meaning you're en route to citizenship and you can collect benefits and all the rest of it, we're going to scrap that status and you will have to reapply for a visa, which you only get if you're earning a good salary, if you're not on benefits, you can speak English properly. So setting the sort of criteria that most people would expect in terms of access to our country.
Can we come to your new role? You will be leading a department preparing reform for government. Danny, what's becoming clear, I think, is that many of our institutions, the civil service, as you've just mentioned, the police, the judiciary, the universities, have to some extent been colonised by a left-wing diversity, inclusion ideology, which makes introducing any right-wing policies very hard. We did see that when Suella Braverman was Home Secretary and she tried to rein in the non-crime hate incidents. Say we have a majority reform government in 2029. How hard is it going to be to get a grip on these institutions and make them start doing what the British people want?
Well, that's absolutely the right question. It's the one that Nigel Farage has tasked me to answer. And all I can say at this very early stage is that we are committed to doing what it takes to ensure that the manifesto that we present will be delivered. And that manifesto is going to be one that is radical. But in order to deliver a radical manifesto, you have to have a very serious plan behind it. And my job, working with Zira at USIP, who's head of policy, is to ensure that all the particular plans that we come up with have the legislative programme ready, but also the executive machinery of government changes that are going to be needed. Because I think the great problem we have that you identify all the time, Allison, is that when you vote for a change of government, you just get a different set of ministers. But the real government remains, which is the government civil service. And our mission has got to be to change that system. And so without going into much detail yet, because it's too early, I know that Nigel and Zia really do want to ensure we reform the way Whitehall itself operates. We need to make the government accountable to elected ministers. That means ministers accountable to Parliament. And it also means the House of Lords needs to understand that when a new government is elected with a popular mandate from a manifesto, as the current convention already entails, but it's going to be a much more punchy manifesto than the House of Lords is used to, they will have to understand that this is what the public wants, and that if the Commons passes new laws, it's expected that the House of Lords should do so as well. They should do their job properly, of course, scrutinise. But if there's a manifesto commitment, it is expected that they'll fall into line.
You did tell MPs in July that you agreed with reform on many issues except public spending. You were saying reform would be spending money like drunken sailors. Now, Danny, co-pilot Halligan has suggested in his Substack, When the Facts Change, that you and Nigel Farage could potentially clash over economic policy because you have a preference for small state conservative and budgetary prudence, while Nigel is obviously eyeing red wall voters where reining in welfare spending could be rather unpopular. Are you convinced that your values and Nigel's align in this area?
Yes, I'm glad to say they do. And Liam should have been there this morning for the press conference because Nigel, not for the first time, by the way, he said the same thing at his party conference a few weeks ago, is absolutely committed to making major reductions in welfare spending. I mean, it's a key theme for him and Zia, that the welfare state is being abused and taxpayers are being treated unfairly. So the good news is, I mean, it's necessary given our fiscal situation, but also I think it's morally and socially more just to ensure that people who can work do, and that families and communities are properly supported to look after people rather than everybody immediately going to DWP. So yes, there will be significant reforms announced fairly soon. Lee Anderson is working with Zia on our welfare policy. I recognise that a lot of communities do experience high levels of public spending. We can't just whip that away overnight. Nevertheless, it is very wrong that the taxpayer is spending tens of billions of pounds. The health and disability benefits bill is going up in this parliament by more than the entire defence budget. So just the increase is bigger than defence spending. That is absolutely scandalous. We've got to get welfare under control if we're to invest properly in the armed forces and also to deliver the tax cuts that are needed.
In recent opinion polls, we've seen reform on as much as 34%, generally hovering around the 30% mark, while Labour and Tories, sometimes put together, don't reach that total. Danny, you're a keen student of political history. Are we poised, do you think, for a historic, almost revolutionary rejection of the two-part British system?
Well, I don't like revolutions, and something I've been keen to stress is that I think of reform as basically being about restoration, not revolution. We're trying to bring back a system of parliamentary accountability and small state government that works. But from a party point of view, I guess this is a revolutionary moment, because I do think we are seeing the passing of the flame from an old torch to a new one. And, the flame of conservatism, because that remains the essential principles of what we on the right believe in, I think is more vibrant than ever. I think it's a very exciting time to be a small c conservative. I just think the problem is the Conservative Party. So conservatives, I think, should have hope in a moment like this, rather than despair. But obviously those of us attached to the old Conservative Party will have a sense of regret. I don't think the Conservative Party is going to disappear, but I do think it's over, at least for now, as a national party. Whereas I think reform we're going to see over the next year making strides in all corners of the United Kingdom. So if you are a Conservative, you should be thinking, well, brilliant, we've now got a vehicle that can actually deliver and that the public might trust.
On October the 13th, a couple of weeks' time, it would have been Margaret Thatcher's 100th birthday. I think, Danny, we can probably guess what she'd think of the current Labour government. Do you think if Lady Thatcher were here with us today, would she be reform or conservative, and why?
Who can tell? I mean, Charles Moore, who, your colleague, is the great Thatcher expert, he's sticking with the Tories. Maybe she would. I mean, she was in a sense a traditionalist, but, so am I. I mean, I'm not going to claim her for the Reform Party. I think that's unfair. And in fact, as much as I admire Margaret Thatcher, I don't think she got everything right. I don't think we should hold her up as the absolute lodestar of our politics. Nevertheless, if we are looking to her, we can see somebody who had very strong beliefs, was prepared to break with orthodoxy, including with the senior figures in her own party, in order to chart a new course that connected with a new generation and spread conservatism widely in a way that traditional great heroes of conservatism from Stanley Baldwin and Benjamin Disraeli and Pitt the Younger, this is what great conservative leaders do. They break with the orthodoxy. Unfortunately, what that means for us now is actually breaking with the party itself. But that's not new either. Peel did it, Churchill did it. I think it's acceptable to say we're not here to serve the Conservative Party. We're here to serve the country. And the right thing for all Conservatives who care about our country, rather than just our party, is to switch to a party which increasingly is credible, very well led, demonstrated resilience and character in pursuit of a clear vision for our country, and which is increasingly attracting support, not just from the disgruntled Brexit voter who feels let down by the Tories, but by serious people of all political stripes who recognise that only reform can bring genuine change.
Danny, in your constituency, there's an army base which is being used to house a lot of Afghanis who were brought in under the super injunction under the last Conservative government. On Planet Normal, we're hearing a lot of worrying things about soldiers being denied accommodation, which is going to the Afghans. I'm hearing about Afghan women on the base who are shut away in houses, not allowed outside as British women would be. I'm hearing that many of the men were not actually working for British forces in Afghanistan, which is the reason we've had to offer them asylum in the first place. Do you, as the MP there, understand local people's concerns? And could the lack of vetting of thousands of Afghans admitted to the UK in secret pose a national security issue?
Yes, the answer is absolutely. So I've had a number of meetings with local communities in the army towns, as well as with the army itself, and I met the minister, spoken to a local authority and so on. It's actually remarkably difficult to get clear answers about how many people are in Wiltshire. Thousands have passed through under these Afghan schemes. Most have moved on again. They were just housed temporarily, but a significant number are settled permanently. We don't know how many of these people brought under the secret deal ended up in Wiltshire, because those numbers have just been included in the general number we've got. So these are some of the questions I'm seeking answers to from the government at the moment. I'm not getting very far. I am very, very concerned about the impact on our communities, about the impact on army accommodation. I'm assured that army families have not been moved out to make way for Afghan families, but those aren't the anecdotes that I hear on the ground. So something is up, and there's a real lack of trust among communities for what they're hearing from the MOD. I don't want to fan flames irresponsibly, But I do share the genuine concern of the communities there about how many people are here, what pressure there will be on local services, and of course on the cultural change that is involved. And yes, the question about vetting and national security, of course we should be very concerned about people who, in the case of the secret list, were by definition chancers. I mean, they failed to get onto the original scheme, which was for soldiers and interpreters and people who work with the British forces. So in a sense, they'd lied in the first place. Then they were brought over because their names were accidentally emailed out of the British Army. It turns out they shouldn't have been brought over here. The government's done its own investigation and concluded that there was no particular risk because of that email cock-up. I think the whole thing has been a complete fiasco, and it's a great shame because I and other groups of people, especially these soldiers in our constituency, were very proud to welcome what they thought were their former comrades and people who'd helped them. The principle was a very noble one. But I'm afraid it looks like the scheme has been very mishandled and indeed abused.
Well, I'm going down there shortly to speak to some army wives, so I'll keep you posted. Extraordinarily, Danny, I've heard from a whistleblower in the last few days that quite a lot of Afghans and Pakistanis and indeed Iranians and Iraqis in our country are going back on holiday to their country of origin, the country they claim to have fled for fear of persecution. Would that make us mugs, Danny Kruger, the British people?
I'm afraid it would. Yes, I'm aware of that. And I'm afraid I'm not surprised. I mean, that is a problem we've got with a lot of people who, in one way or another, seek refuge in our country. They're coming because they have a chance for a better life. In a sense, we can't blame them for that. But I think we can blame them if they're pretending to be the victims of persecution or they're coming from an unsafe place. I mean, thinking now about people who come on small boats, they're mainly not coming from an unsafe place if it's France. And as you say, we now hear some people who come from Afghanistan who were flown here directly by the British government are popping back for weddings and so on. And I've seen videos of that. So yeah, it's hard to do checks on everybody adequately. Nevertheless, I think it absolutely is a failure of the government. Of successive governments. We clearly seem to have been taken for a ride by a lot of people who shouldn't be in this country.
You gave a magnificent speech, much commented on in the House of Commons about Christianity. You're a strong Christian yourself, about the huge pivotal importance in our culture of Christianity. Does it concern you that this rapid demographic change, and particularly seeing the Labour Party apparently making policy based on accommodating Muslim voters, does that concern you, Danny, that we're going to see a potential downgrading of our national religion?
I absolutely do. And we need to be sensible in the way we discuss this topic, but I think you put it very well. It's a paradox that actually in the House of Commons, you've got quite a large number of Muslim MPs who I find myself in the same camp with over questions like assisted dying. But there's some really impressive Labour MPs on that topic, like Naz Shah from Bradford. But you also have MPs who are explicitly elected on a sort of pro-Gaza ticket, some of these independents. And as you said, you see Labour, the Labour Party as a whole, tacking wildly towards the Islamist cause, certainly towards the Palestinian cause, because of the pressure of Muslim voters in their constituencies. So here we have foreign policy being made by a minority, and because of the electoral realities in our area and because of mass migration, the consequence of decades of open borders. So yes, I am very worried about its impact on foreign policy. I think the recognition of Palestinian state is a shameful day for this country for so many reasons, primarily because of the betrayal of Israel. But it's the consequence of a weak Labour government and of a problem in our communities. In terms of its impact on national religion, as we put it, I'm glad to say that we have an established church. Our head of state who swears an oath to uphold the Church of England and the Christian religion. In the House of Commons, we pray every morning together, or prayers are said over us at least. Lots of Labour and Liberal MPs ostentatiously sit down and ignore the prayers, but nevertheless they happen. And I said in that speech, the House of Commons itself was built on the model of a chapel, which it used to be in the old palace. The institutions of our country, including the law itself, the common law, from King Alfred onwards, have been shaped around Christian teachings. We are a Christian country if we are anything. And I'm hoping that maybe these crises we're in, of all different sorts, but including the crisis of culture and migration, is waking people up to think actually that there's something very precious about our Christian heritage. Maybe they'll think there's something precious about Christianity itself, which of course I think. I don't just want tokenistic cultural Christianity, but it's not for me to try and get people to believe one thing or the other. But I do think it's important for us to recognise that we have something very valuable in Christianity as the basis of our common life together.
As you've just mentioned, Keir Starmer has announced Britain is recognising a Palestinian state, and we've already had one Hamas leader saying the fruits of the 7th of October is what made the whole world open its eyes to the Palestinian cause. Now, extraordinarily worrying that our country would be seen to be rewarding one of the worst massacres, certainly the worst massacre of the Jews since the Holocaust. Danny, could you see a reform government reversing that decision?
Well, listen, I think the fact is it's a meaningless declaration that's been made because what is being recognised? I mean, just the aspiration for a Palestinian state. There is no such thing as a Palestinian state to recognise at the moment. You know, a state needs to have certain features, including recognised boundaries, a government that controls it, the ability to conduct foreign policy. I mean, the only entity that could plausibly have those things at the moment, in the case of Gaza, is Hamas. Is that being included in the Palestinian state? Presumably. Even the Palestinian Authority, I think, would be a stretch to suggest that it has those qualities. And they hate each other anyway, those two. And we've all just declared we're never having anything to do with Hamas. So, I mean, I just think it's a meaningless declaration in itself, but it signals an absolutely terrible capitulation to terror. And it's being used explicitly as a stick to beat Israel with, the failure to comply with these absurd demands that Starmer made of the Israeli government about how to conduct their war with Hamas. I can't speak for the future other than to say no government binds its successors. And I wouldn't expect Nigel Farage to show significant respect to this meaningless and very ill-judged declaration that Keir Starmer has made.
And finally, Danny Kruger, I was hearing over the weekend that certain Tory MPs on the right of the party are now thinking seriously of following your example. What would be your advice to them?
I suppose I'd advise them to get on with it and also to demonstrate to Nigel the value that they would bring. I'm very pleased to have been invited to join and to have been trusted with this job about helping the party prepare for government. I'm conscious that the Reform Party is a new party. It's not just the reinvented Conservative Party. And I don't detect in him a huge appetite for large numbers of defections. He gets on personally with some Conservative MPs who maybe he would like to welcome. But thankfully, I don't have anything to do with that. Nobody knew about my defection. I didn't know about anybody else's.
Well, we wish you the best of luck, Danny Kruger, as you prepare to do battle with the blob. Please keep us informed and come back and tell us on Planet Normal how you're getting on. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I must say, Allison, I much enjoyed that discussion. He is an impressive guy. I've enjoyed talking to Danny Kruger over the years. I think it's a big scalp for reform. This is a guy, of course, who led Robert Jenrick's leadership campaign. This is a guy who's operated at the very top of government. And I thought it was quite bold of him when he suggested that Nigel may reverse that Palestine recognition that we were discussing before, and also his reassurances that he and Nigel see eye to eye now on tax and welfare. For my money, the economy, the size of the state, these are all circles that reforms still need to square. If they have had everything their own way in recent months, they are on a high. Even neutrals should acknowledge the scale of their achievement coming from nowhere, a party that didn't exist just a few years ago. Then 5 MPs, indeed, on 14% of the vote. The Lib Dems got 72 MPs on 11% of the vote. Let's never forget that. But now they are well above 30%, often in the opinion polls. The Tories marooned below 20%. But I do get the feeling that Danny Kruger isn't the kind of guy just to jump ship because the Tories are struggling. I genuinely believe him when he says he thinks the Tories are irredeemably damaged, at least for the next few years. I don't agree with him that the Tories are completely down and out. I do think they'll come back, though I absolutely know where he's coming from when he says it could take a very long time.
Well, I have a lot of time for him, as you could probably tell, and I think he is very, very thoughtful and honest in a world that's often neither of those things. But I think it's just very damning, isn't it, for the Conservatives that he thinks that the values that he thinks of as conservatism cannot prevail within a Tory party, which, as we have often said, Liam, is still full, unfortunately, of Conservatives in name only.
Now our listener emails. Your messages sent to planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk. Please keep them coming. We learn so much from you, the citizens of Planet Normal.
Laura says, this is interesting, Liam, I received indefinite leave to remain this year, and I was shocked that the letter said, your ILR has been approved and you now have the right to collect benefits. That was it, just those 2 points. No, says Laura, I'm not collecting benefits. This definitely needs to be reformed, and they should not be sending out invitations to foreigners to claim benefits. And Jason commented to me on X, When you explain what indefinite leave to remain means and the benefits it unlocks, and the fact that foreigners can arrive in this country, earn a pittance, and soon become eligible for a lifetime of pension credit, housing, and free NHS, then decent people will realise it's a complete scam.
This is from Helen. I listened to Liam's interview with Catherine Porter. Catherine, of course, is an energy expert, and I interviewed her a couple of weeks ago, didn't I, Allison?
Yes.
The quality of discussion and clarity of reason was very helpful. I live a 20-minute drive from Planet Normal HQ, brackets Saffron Walden, an area you will both know. This historic high-grade farmland and beautiful local amenity is under threat of an industrial solar farm larger than the size of Heathrow Airport. The local MP has been noticeably absent from discussions, meaning we need to spread the word far and wide regarding the damage this development would do to nature and communities in the long term. Many of the residents who are objecting are not anti-solar, far from it, but we're against the obliteration of landscapes without a cohesive plan for both food and energy security, in the pursuit of lining a few already wealthy pockets in the name of green energy. Please help us in raising awareness. All the best, Helen.
Helen makes a really good point, doesn't she, Liam? I mean, this solar farm, the size of Heathrow, right, in our part of the world, on much needed, we're in a beautiful part of the world, much needed farmland, just more Miliband madness. I really hope that there's a backlash to this. This is Christine. Dear Alison and Liam, I've been an avid listener of Planet Normal since the first episode, and I can say you are certainly responsible for keeping me sane during lockdown.
Woohoo!
Listening this week to Liam's interview with Molly Kingsley reminded me just how much harm we did to our children and young people. We have 9 grandchildren, says Christine, now ranging from 9 to 22. Our eldest granddaughter was one of the victims that Molly spoke about. Emily had started a chemistry degree and, like many first-year students, was in halls. All in-person lectures were cancelled, no lab work undertaken, and apart from the other occupants of her student accommodation, no personal contact. Those students were prisoners in their flat. After struggling for some time, Emily went back to live at home to try to study remotely. At the end of her first year, a very disillusioned young woman emerged. The prospect of a second year of online lectures was a daunting one. She and her parents were told that huge investment had been made in the technology and learning from video lectures was likely to continue with limited access to practical work. This is where I want to tell you how proud we all are of this young woman who decided to break free. She changed from chemistry to maths and statistics, applied for an open university course, found a job working 3 11-hour days to fund her studies. There followed a grueling 3 long work days, followed by 3 days of study and 1 day off. All Emily's hard work has paid off, and now, after achieving a 2-1 degree, she starts her newly acquired graduate position at the beginning of October.
Yay!
This is one of the lockdown success stories, but I'm so upset about all the other young people who fell through the cracks and have been badly treated. It is outrageous that the COVID inquiry has taken so long, but thank goodness for people like Molly and Ben Kingsley who won't rest until the truth comes out. If you decide that this correspondence warrants a Planet Normal mug, says Christine, I'm going to donate it to my lovely granddaughter. Oh, see what you did there? To take pride of place on the desk in her new job. Keep up the good work. Best wishes, Christine.
This is from John, Allison and Liam. Keir Starmer's biggest mistake, not replacing Rachel Reeves with Angela Rayner. In just 12 years, Big Ange has gone from earning the minimum wage to owning an £800,000 flat. She's a financial genius. And this is from another John. Perhaps Israel should retaliate by saying it no longer recognises Great Britain, as I don't recognise it anymore. And I live here.
Oh, very good, John.
And finally, Alison, Bob the Bard is back.
Dear Planet Normal, I'm very excited about your plan to fill Britain's potholes. More of that anon, listener. But if you really want this to be a success, I think you're going to need an advert to help spread the word. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on your point of view, I have therefore written a poem to use in your advertising campaign. Thanks again for Planet Normal, the podcast that not only fills us with hope, but also fills our potholes. Regards, Bob. So it's coming to a hole near you. Off you go, Halligan.
What's that in the distance? A pair of familiar figures. It's Allison and Liam. approaching on a digger.
They're wearing hard hats on their heads and big boots on their feet, and they've come to fix the potholes that are blighting Britain's streets.
Liam's quite the expert with the excavator bucket, but occasionally he slips up and then he shouts out, "Fudge!"
Alison's looking lovely in her slimline high-vis vest. She fills the hole with tarmac, and then she's off to fix the rest.
So if you've seen a pothole and it's making you annoyed, just call Allison and Liam, and they'll come and fill the void. And on that bombshell, that's it from Planet Normal as we leave our sanctuary of sweet reason, our flying refuge of reason views. Email of the week, it's my turn. Well, you know, Christine, she tugs on the heartstrings. I'm a sucker for that. So, Christine, send us an email with mug winner in the subject heading. Give us your postal address and we'll send you your much coveted Planet Normal mug that you can do with as you please.
I think to be gifted to Emily, who, well done, Emily, for coming through all that dreadful lockdown period and making a success. Fantastic news.
And some news about us, a Planet Normal live event on Sunday, the 19th of October at 11 a.m. We'll be recording a special edition of Planet Normal at the Battle of Ideas Festival at Church House in central London.
It's a really fantastic weekend. Can't recommend it too highly. Not just us, not just a chance to buy us a drink, nudge, nudge, but just absolutely brimming with ideas from across the political spectrum. Tickets are available through the festival website for us and for all the other events, battleofideas.org.uk. And there's a Planet Normal discount code. Use the word planet, Planet, caps, when buying tickets and you'll get a better deal.
And if you enjoyed this episode of Planet Normal, please subscribe and leave us a rating and review wherever you listen. Thanks finally to our producers, Cass Ho, Louisa Wells, James Hodgson. Stay safe and in touch with us and with each other. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.